Namaskaram. Welcome to PGurus Prime Time. I'm your host Sri Iyer, and with me today is Professor D Nalapat. After a hiatus of several weeks, Professor Nalapat, Namaskaram, and welcome to PGurus channel.
Thank you, Sri. Always a privilege and a pleasure to be in your channel, on your
So
channel.
the pleasure is all mine, sir. And the important concern that the world has now with Afghanistan is, yes, it has been conquered. It has looks like one country has annexed another country. However, that information was not visible on the day it happened. But as things played out, now it is fairly clear that it is Pakistan which is calling the shots. Some of the things that I'm hearing, and I'd like you to let me know what you think. Some of the things I'm hearing, we had an expert yesterday who said that Pakistani currency is going to be what's going to be used in Afghanistan, and that the Pakistani army is going to run the country. They're going to run the banks, they're going to run the police stations, they are going to run the public utilities, post office, what have you. So this is the sort of thing that this specialist laid out. I don't know how true that is, and if it is true, what are the ramifications? Is this more or less an annexation? And also, I'm hearing that the inauguration hasn't taken place, that some people in the so called cabinet are not to be seen anywhere. So, to unravel all this for us, Professor Nalapat, take it away and let us know what you think is happening there.
Well, Sri, in my case, I've been in touch with Afghanistan for several decades, actually. In fact, just before 9/11 happened, I visited the United States twice, met people in the government, in the congressional, in the U.S. Congress, staffers in the U.S. Congress, etc., because I had indications from Kandahar and Jalalabad that a major strike was going to hit the United States. I came there, met people in the US, but nobody believed me. In fact, the day before 9/11, Lakshmi and I were in New York. We were in the Lexington Hotel. I think it's called Radisson subsequently. It is a few miles from ground zero. And I had a conversation with a senior professor in analytics, I think Jack Snyder, if I recall. And I told Jack that, look, these chaps are guys who are planning to hit you. He said, not at all, they're not going to hit us. I said, well, if they hit you, they'll probably hit New York because it's a symbol of the economic might of America. And his reply to me was classic. New York is the safest city in the world. So I think soon after that, Dr. Snyder probably would have changed his view about New York and about the Taliban. But what I'm saying is, I've been tracking Afghanistan for a long time. Don't forget, we have nearly 1 million, absolutely million Afghans in India. A lot of the Afghan leaders have their families in India. Interestingly, a substantial section of the Taliban have got families who have been educated in India and some families who are living in India. So please don't forget that. So India is actually, has been very welcoming to Afghans, and the Afghan people have been very warm towards India. You go to Afghanistan as a Pakistani, well, you should be careful. You should bring your bodyguard along. But if you go as an Indian, it will be embarrassing because no one will allow you to buy anything. They'll give they'll give it to you free because they love India. So please understand, Afghanistan is not what some so-called Afghan experts in the United States. And these are the same people who led to the series of blunders that have been made in Afghanistan over the last such a long period, over the last 30 years. Because even in 1979, 1980, Brzezinski and Casey, they basically outsourced this to the Pakistan military. And as was predicted then, what happened was that the Pakistan military then empowered the radical Pashtuns rather than the nationalist Pashtuns. The nationalist Pashtuns are moderate Pashtuns, many of them. The radical Pashtuns are not moderate. They're religious extremists. And Pakistan felt that religious identity will overtake the nationalism of the Pashtun, who has been cruelly separated more than 100 years ago, 1892 to be precise, by the Durand Line. 1893, I think that the Durand Line was set up, a completely arbitrary division of Pashtunistan. And now one half of Pashtunistan is in Afghanistan, the other half is in Pakistan. And someday these two halves will come together and there'll be an independent Pashtunistan. Afghanistan, frankly, you need, there has to be a Tajik space, there has to be an Uzbek space, there has to be a Pashtun space. But that Pashtun space will have to be a unified Pashtun space. So, frankly, from day one, I've been saying that Pakistan does not realize, the Pakistan military does not realize the quagmire it is in. Just as the Chinese do not realize the quagmire that they have entered into, just as the Soviets did not realize the quagmire they entered into, nor did the Americans understand the quagmire they entered into when Bush radically changed the strategy around the middle of 2002 and stopped supporting the Northern Alliance and then went back to the Pashtun warlords because that's what his good friend General Musharraf said. Oh, these are the good Pashtuns, these are the good Afghans, so let's support them. These so-called good Afghans were the Taliban. And you'll be surprised, it is United States money, the money doled out by George W. Bush, that essentially brought back the Taliban to life. It's American dollars, American taxpayer dollars. Why? Because the Pakistan general said, oh, X is a good Taliban, or rather a good Pashtun. Y is a moderate, when actually X and Y were extremists, fanatics, and viciously anti-American. I mean, frankly, I never believed that the United States, the top leadership of the United States would be so credulous. But after seeing what Trump and then Biden have done in the case of Afghanistan, now I can believe anything about the United States. You have some excellent people there. The tragedy is they're at the middle level, they're at the lower level. At the higher levels, you have a lot of people who have basically been studying 20, 30 years, language, customs, etc. And they're completely out of date. Because India, Afghanistan, China, all these countries, they keep changing every few years. Every 6, 7 years, maybe 10, 12 years maximum, they keep changing completely. But these chaps who are your so-called experts, very, very frankly, the reality is they can't change because it takes them 10 to 15 years to study in the depth that they're studying. And what they're now regurgitating is the past. So the problem in America is that there are first-class analysts, there are first-class observers on the ground, but that intel just does not go up the ladder because people who have got a vested interest in continuing to claim that they are experts will block it from going up the ladder or put all kinds of codicils. Oh, this is suspicious information. This could be disinformation. This could be misinformation. Whereas it is they who have been giving misinformation. And this misinformation made Donald Trump go in for that disastrous Doha surrender to Taliban. And this disinformation and misinformation by senior levels in the US administration made Joe Biden meekly go in the path of Donald Trump and operationalize surrender to the Taliban. I would like to say, I'm very sorry, I don't agree with this guest of yours. Maybe he's right, who knows? I mean, I've got a fairly good record on Afghanistan over the years. If you read my writing and you read what happened, I think you'll find out. I have, so far the Taliban is concerned, I am very clear, Sri. I have identified 6 groups in the Taliban. 2 of those groups are controlled by the Pakistan military. One of those groups are basically controlled through the pocketbook, through the wallet by China. And 3 groups are what I call free Taliban. That is, they're not free in the sense of their ideology, but they're definitely free in the sense that they are not linked to the Sino-Wahhabi network and the Sino-Pakistan network. So Taliban itself is a mosaic of these 6 different factions. The interesting thing is many of the older leaders are essentially in the China faction or the faction, 2 factions controlled by Pakistan. And almost 80% of the younger cadre are in the so-called free of Pakistan-China faction. So the point is, the younger people, the younger Pashtuns, the younger Afghans, they don't want to be under the thumb of Pakistan or China. They resent that. And as I've said before on this channel, so far as, Pakistan is concerned, ethnically, You have people from the Potiawar region who dominate the Pakistan. They're Punjabis. And the Pathans and Punjabis, frankly, historically, that's not been a very pleasant relationship. Now, so that is the situation. So essentially, you have got that huge gap between the Pakistan military and the Potiawari military. And the Potiawari military, which is the Potiawari military, the Punjabi military, because the Pakistan military is completely, may I say, absolutely completely in the grip of the Punjabis, especially Potiawari Punjabis. Now, China, the Chinese people love their pork. I'm told one of the largest pork companies in the US has just been bought by China, by some Chinese company. I mean, they got a ready market because the Chinese love their pork. I don't know if they can live for more than 3 days continuously without pork. I don't think so. They love their alcohol. And if I may say so, Chinese women, I mean, they dress like women in Los Angeles or, or Miami Beach or something like that. They dress in that manner. And I would say it's their right to dress in whatever way, light dress or no dress or whatever. It's a human right. But don't tell me that the Taliban people like that kind of dress. They regard it as basically not only, un-Islamic. I wouldn't like to use the word Islamic, un-Wahhabi, but they regard it as basically people who eat pork regularly, sometimes twice, thrice a day, like the Chinese do. People who drink alcohol every day. And I must confess, Sri, since this wretched corona epidemic came over the last nearly 2 years, I have cut down my ration of 3 or 4 glasses of wine, red wine every month to almost zero. I think it's now more than a month and a half or two since I last had a glass of red wine. So, I think the Taliban will love me for that. I'm sure. I don't take pork. I'm a vegetarian. But the reality is that fundamentally, the Pakistan military is temperamentally and ethnically different, divergent, and in fact, definitely, not on the same page as the Taliban. The Chinese, as a civilization, as a culture, are definitely not on the same page as the Taliban. Believe me, definitely not. Or the Wahhabis. Although today, the Wahhabis are now being empowered massively by China because they see in Wahhabism a perfect weapon against the United States, against India, against any of the countries that they feel will challenge their rise. So that is the situation. So look, the Afghan people do not want the Taliban to come. They know what the Taliban is. Don't forget, it was a U.S. president, William Jefferson Clinton, if I remember his name. It was Bill Clinton who gave a red carpet to the Taliban to enter into Afghanistan, into Kabul, and run that. I mean, you had Bill Clinton as the godfather of the Taliban, and now you got Donald Trump and Joe Biden sharing the title of godfather of the second coming of the Taliban into Kabul. So it is the Americans, frankly, who have made this horrible mistake. First Bill Clinton, and then Biden and Trump. So I would only like to say that inside the Taliban, what you just now said, this segment I would just like to close by saying, well, I don't know if Mullah Baradar has gone out of Afghanistan. I don't know if Stanekzai has gone out of Afghanistan. I know very well that Stanekzai is a part of the Free Taliban. Mullah Baradar, I think, I was under the impression, frankly, that he was leaning towards the Pakistan side. But now it's very clear on the information that I'm getting that he's also part of the Free Taliban. And the Free Taliban are resisting the Sino-Pakistan, I'm not going to use the word slaves or servants or whatever, but basically the Sino-Pakistan, if I say so, junior associates in the Taliban. Not in the case of Pakistan Army, they're not junior associates, they're servants. In the case of China also, they're servants of money. So you have servants of China and Pakistan, the Taliban, and you've got Taliban who are only servants to their ideology. But one thing that unites them, Sri, if I may say so, this is a common ideology of all the 6 factions. And that is quote unquote, we must teach the Crusaders a lesson. God knows when the Crusades happened. You Google it, you'll find out. It was way before even my time, and I'm not the youngest guy in the world. But the reality is, these chaps believe it's their historic and religious duty to go after Crusaders. That means your country, Sri. That means Europe. That means Great Britain. All these countries, France, Germany, all these countries, Poland, to go after them and destroy them somehow. And this ideology is shared by the entire Taliban. It was shared by the Taliban that was ushered in by Bill Clinton. It is shared by the Taliban that has been ushered in by Trump and Biden. So believe me, on the anti-Western, anti-Crusader slant, they are completely united. So far as India is concerned, it is basically the China faction and the Pakistan factions that are trying to steer the Taliban towards India. But the reality is that the other three factions regard the Pakistan military as a more juicier target. And may I just conclude my last statement in this segment by saying the Pashtuns in Pakistan, who have been smarting under the domination and control of the Pakistan military and its ethnically different leadership, they are saying if the mighty United States was vanquished by our brothers in Afghanistan, and by the way, there are no sisters there, by the way, in the Taliban, there are only brothers. No sisters are allowed anywhere near. So sorry, no sisters. If the mighty Americans can be vanquished by our brothers across this ridiculous Durand Line, why can't we vanquish this third-rate Pakistan military? So I can tell you, the country that has got a lot to lose is Pakistan from what their so-called takeover of Afghanistan. You will see this playing out over the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months.
So let me ask you one specific pointed question from what I had started out with. Is the Pakistani rupaya now the currency in Afghanistan, to the best of your knowledge?
Look, the Pakistan rupee has been the currency for a very long time. It's been the currency all along. Like Indian rupee, for example, is in currency in Afghanistan. You go there with Indian rupees, it will be accepted. Absolutely. But and frankly, they would prefer to hold on to Indian rupees. And a less safer alternative is the Pakistan rupee, for the simple reason that the Afghan currency is on a sliding slope. So the reality is that multiple currencies are in vogue in Afghanistan, but the real solid currency is the US dollar. You go there with a pack of 20s or hundreds. If you go there with a pack of hundreds, well, if the Taliban leave you alone and don't kill you or whatever, believe me, you'll be treated like a king in Afghanistan. So dollars are the king. Rupee, frankly, is not even a nobleman. And the Pakistan thing is not even an employee, frankly. So you're talking about the Pakistan currency, it is the last stage. Indian currency in between, and dollar as the king.
So, Professor Nalapat, as we speak, hearings are going on, and many of the members of the Biden administration are being hauled over the coals by the House as well as the Senate committees on what transpired, what played down in the American withdrawal. One question that is rankling a lot of people, and they're asking these questions, and I'm hoping that you can provide us with a perspective. See, US had this state-of-the-art airbase called the Bagram airbase. It had 2 landing and takeoff strips. If it wanted to vacate and wanted to orderly vacate all its people, they could have used that airbase, and you could have just made that thing as still had a presence there, because that was what was sort of understood even when they were talking about everybody leaving, that the Bagram airbase was too modern. It had invested a lot of money into making that US would keep it. But looks like they also let it go. What do you think happened? Because from what Trump signed, I'm hearing, to what Biden did, there's a big difference.
Sri, I'm sorry. That's something which the large number of Republicans who have basically become POT, the party of Trump, are saying. The reality is Trump signed a surrender document at Doha. He had no business to do that. And in that, he delegitimized the Afghan government and he legitimized a terror group that is totally opposed to the United States. And it is Trump who committed that original sin. What Joe Biden did was basically operationalize that. So, frankly, don't let Trump off the hook. As far as Bagram airbase is concerned, he has been doing a lot, 2020 hindsight. But the reality is, even Trump is a bit embarrassed by the fact that he signed the surrender document to the Taliban. So I'm very sorry. I don't think you can excuse Donald Trump. Look, there have been a series of mistakes in Afghanistan. You go back to 2001. 2001, what did the Americans do? What did George W. Bush do? He basically gave full support to the Northern Alliance. And the Northern Alliance, if I may use a little bit of slang, creamed the Taliban. They demolished the Taliban. They drove it out of almost every part of Afghanistan. They went back to Pakistan, of course, where they revived, thanks to American taxpayer money. But then what happened? Sometime around the middle of 2002, the Europeans and the Americans, they always know better about everybody. They know the language, they know the culture, they know the people, they know the mindset, they know the psychology. That's what they think. And that's why they make mistake after mistake. So they said, what are you doing with these Tajiks and Uzbeks and some moderate Pashtuns and all that? You have to go with the real Pashtun. And the real Pashtun, according to them, is a radical, which is not true. Actually, the Pashtuns have been an extremely tolerant community. You had Buddhist stupas there. You had the Bamiyan Buddha, for example, before the Taliban. You have Hindu temples there. You have Sikh gurdwaras there. All that was going on there in Afghanistan, in Pashtun land. But the reality is the Pakistanis were opposed to that. They wanted a hardcore religious identity on the Pashtuns because they felt that Pakistan, the quote-unquote land of the pure, so to speak, So the point of the matter is that because of that, I would like to say that this is what happened. You can argue, and I think I have argued that pretty strongly. Frankly, after Trump betrayed the Kurds, I turned against Trump. After he betrayed the Afghan state, I went even more against Trump. And frankly, I've been extremely nasty on Joe Biden after his surrender to the Taliban. There's no question about it. He made a huge mistake in doing that. I mean, he has reversed so many of Trump's policies, as one of your viewers has just correctly said to me. And, he could have reversed this policy. But the reality is you have these so-called experts. You have the Khalilzads and various other people. I don't want to name people that are there in almost every foundation. People who are essentially 1980s or maybe 1990s people, they're very current, who don't understand the present. They don't understand for example, they're in denial that China is engaged in an existential war, according to the Chinese leadership, with the United States. They don't understand that. They don't understand that Pakistan is toxic rather than, some kind of a naughty child that you give enough lollipops to and suddenly the child will behave. They're in denial about all that. So this is the problem that you're facing in US policy. But may I point out, Sri, I have been strongly supporting President Trump when he was doing good things, and I strongly support Joe Biden when he's doing good things. For example, this stimulus package of his, a $3 trillion plus stimulus package. I think I've looked at the package. It makes a lot of sense from the point of view of re-engineering and reconfiguring US justice in terms of social justice. And I'm only worried that the Supreme Court, where it's been packed with Trump appointees, will overturn that. Because I think this is very essential for stability of the US. I want to say, Sri, as my final statement to this particular question of yours, China, don't forget, the Sino-Wahhabi nexus. The Wahhabis and China are together in a nexus. And this nexus is operating in the United States, along with the Russians, I'm sorry to say, in basically widening fault lines. Whether it's white and black, whether it is rich and poor, whether it's Democrat or Republican, widening fault lines and trying to shrink the moderate middle of society. In India, the same thing is happening. You are seeing extremes on both sides. And these extremes are trying to broaden themselves. And if the Sino-Wahhabi alliance, they have got multiple bots, multiple systems, multiple ways of ensuring, very, very frankly, that, that they infiltrate into a lot of chat shows, talk shows. And I'll give you an example. I mean, an example involving myself. This Council of Strategic Affairs, I had something which also on YouTube on the Taliban, on Afghanistan. And I was very nasty on the Taliban, very nasty on Pakistan, and its supporter China. And what happened. YouTube removed me because some bots controlled by the Chinese side, controlled by the Wahhabis, they flooded the internet with attacks on me, and they took words out of context from my statements and made it out as though I'm supporting radicalism. I'm supporting all kinds of horrible things. And unfortunately, the algorithms in the YouTube completely, seized up and removed my talk. Now it's absurd. I've written this, frankly, in an editorial in Sunday Guardian. So this is the way algorithms are created. I mean, some of the algorithms may have been written by those who have some sentimental attachment to China or who have got some belief in Wahhabism, I don't know. But overall, I think they're innocent algorithms written innocently. But what happens is malicious actors can, and you are an expert, Sri, you know very, very well that you can use bots, you can use social media, the algorithms of all these different platforms to kind of create a wrong message about certain broadcasts, and a wrong message that essentially shuts down broadcasts that are in fact friendly to security, friendly to democracy, friendly to the India-US relationship, as my talk was. And that's exactly what happened. But thanks to these Sino-Wahhabi bots.
Absolutely.
And that's happening in India, that's happening in the United States. You guys, the problem in the United States is when the Republicans were there, you assumed all this bad activity was being done from the Democrats. Now, you're assuming, now that your Biden is in the White House, all this nasty activity is taking place on the Republican side. Please understand there are external players out there. And please understand what I said. The Chinese leadership believes and acts on that belief that it's an existential struggle with the United States, just as the struggle of the Soviet Union and the US was existential, and that one of the systems will have to collapse. And I can tell you, Xi Jinping doesn't want that. It is his system and his leadership that should collapse.
Professor Nalapat, I'm sorry to hear that one of your videos was taken down. Welcome to the club. I had this experience about 18 months ago, and it was a fairly innocuous video. It was about I talking with a expert on clinical systems about how one can fortify oneself by eating vitamin A and also taking a lot of sunlight, doing Surya Namaskar, vitamin D, to try and build your immunity mechanism against COVID. This was taken down because at that point it was considered that this was like a quack medication. We never said it was a medication. We said this is one way to try and you fortify your body to face these kinds of problems. And he had a very scientific explanation as to why vitamin A and vitamin D are essential to fight it. And we talked about, eat leafy vegetables and so on. So anyway, water under the bridge, that never got revived. And after that, one other video also got taken out. These things happen. These days, what happens?
I just want to say, Sri, that it's possible that as in your case and as in mine, some malicious bots, this time possibly from the big pharma lobby, immediately set to work, because these kind of cures are negative of big pharma. What they want is not just vaccines, but very expensive vaccines. But the reality is that tomorrow or day after, it's only India that can produce the pharmaceuticals, the therapeutics, and the vaccines that will be necessary to fight not just the next pandemic, but even this pandemic.
Absolutely. In fact, I just wanted to touch on this, even though it's off topic today, but I want to touch on this, that those vaccines that have been produced based on the mRNA technology, such as Pfizer and Moderna, are not that effective against the Delta variant. On the other hand, Covaxin appears to be just as effective on the Delta variant also. So, what would I expect America to do? That FDA would give emergency approval to Covaxin also, because now a fairly high number of people from Delta are again readmitting, and they're all saying, "Oh, look, we took our 2 shots of vaccines," but the pharma lobby doesn't want them, because Covaxin, once it gets a footprint in the United States, it's going to be the leading pharma company. And we know that this is just the beginning in terms of the new age, where you're going to have one or the other. Bio weapon is here to stay, because the success that has been tasted by whoever it is that let that thing out is immeasurable. That's how I see it. But these are all things that we have to stand and deal with. Professor Nalapat, let's get back to our topic. The big problem today is that there are revelations that are coming out now about what really went down in Afghanistan. So one of the reasons that's given as to why about $88 billion worth of equipment was left behind was that it would have costed the US more than that amount of money to bring it out or take it out or to destroy it. I don't know. I don't buy that. And what they now say is that some of the more critical things, they have been disabled, therefore nobody can use it. But in terms of the actual nuts and bolts, 100,000 assault rifles have been left behind. These are some things that should be of concern to India. Now, also, the inventory that was taken of what was left behind came to around 22 billion. You have 88 billion accounted on ledgers. That was the amount of money that was used to leave the inventory there. No one knows where the remaining 66 billion worth of inventory disappeared to. We don't know. So and then people are laughing. Oh, wait a minute, this is nothing. US has spent 2 trillion. This is nothing when compared to that. But there has been a huge amount of money going in and coming out and landing God knows where. The biggest problem today, that immediate and present, clear and present danger for countries like India, is the impact of those 100,000 rifles. Would those things be employed on the border and across, and they'll come inside? In fact, we will know that in the next few weeks, because after that, many of these passes from which people can come into India will freeze for the winter. So what are your thoughts on what really happened?
Well, I'd like to say, Sri, point number one, if Joe Biden had people who are halfway knowledgeable about situation in Afghanistan, he would have retained control of Bagram. There's no doubt about that. He would have done that, number one. And number two, a lot of that equipment would have found its way to the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance is the cavalry. As in 2001, now in 2011, is the Northern Alliance that should be used as the cavalry with US logistical support to beat back the Taliban. And may I point out that I have totally supported the troop withdrawal of United States forces from Afghanistan. I don't want to see a single US soldier in Afghanistan, barring a handful of people who are trained in logistics, intelligence, and maybe some special operations. No, nobody else. Because the problem in the United States is, if you look at the objectives of any deployment, objective 1 to 9 is force protection. And force protection, unfortunately, it takes place with an enormous amount of collateral damage. You have seen, for example, how an innocent family that was pro-US was incinerated by a United States drone attack because they got information, most likely from the Pakistan military itself, who did not like this pro-US group. The same thing happened during Bush's time, Obama's time, all that. And they got incinerated on the basis of wrong intelligence. So, I would only like to say that today, it's better today, but definitely tomorrow, the United States will have to go back to the Northern Alliance. If they had held on to Bagram, if they had transferred some weapons to the Northern Alliance, by now I can tell you the Taliban would be back in Pakistan. Point number one. Point number two, I don't understand why the United States is not sanctioning Pakistan. I'm not saying sanction Pakistan. If you don't want to sanction the Pakistan army, at least sanction a few retired people in Pakistan, colonels and generals and majors who have been training these terrorists. At least do that. What is scaring you so much about doing that in the case of a country that is plainly neck deep involved in terror operations? So look, I would only like to say that yes, Bagram was a huge mistake. And so far as these weapons are concerned, the Chinese must have got access to almost all of them. They would have paid some pittance to their contacts at Taliban, and their contacts at Taliban would have siphoned it off. A lot of them would have gone back to China. I frankly, I frankly don't know how much, how much value it is. But the reality is, even if you disable a software so that Taliban cannot use it, the fact is China is a very advanced technological state. In artificial intelligence is almost, tip to toe with the United States. So what the Afghan Taliban cannot handle, possibly the Chinese could handle a lot more. And I can assure you, it must be there by now. It must be right there by now. And that's one of the reasons why China is completely so delighted at the Taliban takeover. So I would only like to say the whole thing happened in such a pell-mell manner. I mean, if Biden had decided that he should, he should follow Trump and go for the Doha surrender, he had so many months to operationalize it. February, March, April, May, June, July. What happened? Why didn't he do anything? Why didn't he remove people? So all I can say, Sri, that this has basically not just humiliated the United States, but reduced the confidence of every ally of the United States, including allies as steadfast as Japan, in my opinion, that for God's sake, can we rely on this country? And after seeing Trump and after seeing Biden, the likely answer is no. So when you have a situation in which the Chinese are moving for primacy, they have already got, along with the Russians, primacy on the Eurasian landmass. With primacy over the landmass, it's relatively much easier to get primacy over the oceans, the Indo-Pacific. I'm surprised United States has not realized that, and they've almost given up the Eurasian landmass, except that small segment in Western Europe, to the Sino-Russian alliance. Now they've already got that, and after that they'll move into the Atlantic. So frankly, I don't understand. What is happening, except to say what I said in the beginning, that the United States, unfortunately, there are a lot of people influencing policy who are living in the 80s and 90s, who are right behind the times and who don't understand the change in threats. For example, Hu Jintao. When Hu Jintao gave the order to basically ensure that Chinese technology is as good as American technology and there's no need to rely on American technology, it was a signal that he was planning for a hostile situation in the United States. That was taken forward by Xi Jinping, but these signs have not been listened to. These signs have just been ignored. So, some of us have been talking about Cold War, 2.0 between the United States and China, an existential battle. But if you go to the United States, especially in the Biden camp, where there are a lot of, if I may say so, Wahhabi elements infiltrating into the Biden camp, and possibly some of these elements or some of those outside that particular camp who are influenced by these elements persuaded Biden into this disastrous course. But the reality of the situation is, you are at war as we are at war, and we have to come together. So there's an organized effort to blacken the leadership and the reputation of India in the United States, and blacken the leadership and reputation of the United States in India. I mean, in 2016, I spent a lot of 2015 and 2016 trying to persuade very important people in India to at least meet Donald Trump. I did the same thing in 2020. I tried to persuade a lot of influential people to somehow reach out to the Bidens. They didn't do that. At that time, they believed Hillary will win. Now, then they believe Trump will win, that Trump is going to come back. So, it's not just in Washington, it's in Delhi also that you have this disconnect from reality. But the good news is, I think, The Prime Minister is now definitely getting control of the situation. You have seen in Gujarat, for example, he has replaced the Chief Minister with a much stronger person politically. And in various other ways, he's showing that he understands that some of the advice he's getting is toxic advice.
Professor Nalapat, I think if it's okay with you, we can take some questions from our viewers, and there are many questions, sir. And I'd request you to perhaps spend 2 to 3 minutes on each question, and let's try and see how many we can get through. Can we have the questions, please? Ruchit Fadke wants to know, how will Haqqani network affect us? I think what he's asking is people type on their smartphone, so there are lots of errors. Ruchit Fadke wants to know, will the Haqqani network have any effect on us in Kashmir?
Well, I'd like to say that if we go back to 370, if we do something like that, if we go back on this bifurcation, trifurcation, of Jammu and Kashmir, then we could be in trouble for a simple reason that this 370 and many of these measures that have been taken ever since the Abdullah Indira Gandhi Accords, 1975, I remember, were basically based on the two-nation theory, that Hindus and Muslims are two separate species, that they're two separate civilizations, which is nonsense. There's no difference between Hindus and Muslims. They're all part of the same. They have the same DNA. As the RSS Sarsang Chalak very correctly said, they have the same DNA. So if we make some mistakes, it could be a problem. But I'd like to say, Sri, that frankly, a lot of people in the Taliban are unhappy with the Pakistanis. They are unhappy at the overbearing control of Pakistan and the overbearing attitude of China. Now, what is Pakistan? The many Taliban people know the purpose of Pakistan is to enrich itself. Itself means its military, and also enrich Chinese corporates and serve as a middleman between Afghan resources and Chinese corporates. So what's going to happen? The bulk of the profit will be made by China. A little bit of commission will come to Pakistan. Pennies, nothing virtually, will go to the Afghan people. They don't want that. So that is where you're seeing a lot of tension in Afghanistan that is taking place. I'm sorry that, all these television channels and all that have missed the killings, murders, rapes, torture, the hangings, beheadings that have been taking place in Afghanistan by the Taliban, by elements of the Taliban, especially the elements controlled by Pakistan and who are under the influence of China. But nobody is reporting that. But again, very few are reporting on the resistance of Taliban that is emerging, including from women in Afghanistan. The Afghan women are rising up. And secondly, I want to ask you, Uzbeks, Tajiks, the Tajiks are a quarter of the Afghan population. Will they be happy at having to play the role of, if I may say so, not just a junior role, but an inferior role to the Taliban, which is completely controlled by radical Pashtuns. The entire Taliban is radical Pashtun, and some of them are radical Pashtuns controlled by Pakistan and China. Some of them are radical Pashtuns controlled by themselves only, but they're all radical Pashtuns. Do you think the Tajiks will like that? Do you think the Uzbeks will like that? Do you think the Uzbeks will like the fact that what is happening in some parts of the world to Uzbeks? They're not going to like that. And I can tell you, word of mouth is going on about the way Pashtuns are marginalized in Pakistan, about the way they're humiliated and insulted in Pakistan, about the way Uzbeks are treated in parts of China. And I can tell you this will have its own impact, especially on what I call the free Taliban, that is the young elements of Taliban, which accounts for more than about 80%, I would say, maybe a little less than 80%, little more. You can't get exact figures on that, of the total strength of the Taliban. They're not happy about this. And the greater this situation is allowed to continue, well, the more this problem will come. At the same time, it doesn't mean that India is off the hook. The United States is off the hook. Europe is off the hook. Definitely not. So the reality is we have to come together. And in my view, we have to replicate what we did in before 2001. The United States got involved after 9/11. Till 9/11, the Taliban were honored guests. Don't forget George W. Bush. I think I was in Washington during a time when a Taliban delegation visited Washington. And I was in some meetings and people had said, oh, we've just met the Taliban. And they were treated royally by George W. Bush, no less. You know, I mean, Bush is now coming on television and singing a different story. At that point in time, his officials were welcoming the Taliban. It's only after 9/11 they turned to the Northern Alliance. We have been with the Northern Alliance all through India, Iran, Russia. And I would like to, this particular question, the last thing I'd like to say, tensions will be there between Russia and China on this matter. For the simple reason, the Russians cannot afford to let the Tajiks and Uzbeks down. They cannot afford to do that. And the Russians they resent the fact that China is now trying to behave as the masters of Eurasia. Because Eurasia, by Russian definition, is Russia. They believe Eurasia is almost co-terminus with Russia. And in a way, it is geographically. But the Chinese say, no, Eurasia is run by us. Belt and Road Project, this, that, etc. It's run by us. So that I can tell you, the Russians will certainly not be happy about that particular aspect. And they're certainly not going to be happy about the fact that the Tajiks and the Uzbeks are being marginalized, because Central Asia, the Chinese want to be dominant in Central Asia. I mean, tomorrow they'll ask to be dominant in Moscow also. I mean, Xi Jinping has got a fairly expansive idea of China, of basically the civilizational value of China controlling the world. You remember certain European colonial powers had this belief, oh, we should make these people slaves. Because if they're slaves, they'll become more civilized. I'm afraid that a lot of the philosophy that I'm hearing is basically that if we control something, situation will become in equilibrium. It will be normalized. It will be made healthy. That's a very unhealthy attitude. The reality is small and large countries, big and small countries, irrespective of their social composition, religious composition, ethnic composition, they are all equals of each other, and we have to understand that.
The next question from Satyam Datta: will the inevitable Talibanization of Pakistan lead to millions of refugees into India? And if yes, what steps should India take to stop the influx?
Well, it is, I mean, frankly, it is a little because of the fact that the de facto border is not with India. But I'd only like to say that it's a very important question. And I do believe we need to be very cautious, because I am foreseeing a meltdown in Pakistan. And if you're talking about millions of refugees from Afghanistan, let me assure you, we are looking at tens of millions from Pakistan, as there were tens of millions from Bangladesh. Don't forget that. So that is the real danger, and it's lurking 4 or 5 years away. That's all. So we need to start preparing for that now. The reality of the situation is we definitely need to really start preparing for that. It's a very good question, and I hope policymakers in India have got an answer to that question.
Sandy wants to know, respected Nalapat sir, recent reports suggest that US may use Indian air bases to strike in Afghanistan from over the horizon. Your thoughts, sir? Is it good for the Indian foreign policy?
Look, frankly, I would say no, for the simple reason that United States intelligence is so faulty, its targeting is so falsy, that 99% of the people they hit are not going to be Taliban, they're going to be innocent civilians, and we'll get the bad name for that. Over the horizon capability means on the ocean or in some of their military bases like Qatar or Abu Dhabi or places like that. That's fine, Saudi Arabia, but definitely not an airbase in India. If there's an airbase in India, if it needs to be used, it should be used by the Indian Air Force. Let me tell you, we do need American assistance. We need American weaponry. We need American weapons platforms. We need American intel and logistics, but we certainly don't need American personnel, flying out from Indian air bases or ground troops in India. Definitely not. We don't need that. And I can tell you, Sri, given the extreme incompetence of Americans and the extremely high collateral damage that is suffered and the very negative effects of that in the population, the goodwill that is there in Afghanistan for Indian people will disappear with about 10 or 20 such sorties.
Next question from Charan MS. Where does the Tehreek-e-Taliban stand in these six factions of Taliban?
Well, that's again a very interesting question. May I say that there is a lot of interplay between them, but Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan is very much Pashtuns in Pakistan who do not want to be servants of the Potiawari military in Pakistan. The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan has been saying, and China has been saying, India is behind it. Look, we are not Potiawari, Punjabis in the Pakistan military. I don't know if there's any Indian who's a Potiawari. I don't think so. I mean, maybe there are a few people who had to cross over from Potiawar during that particular time, but they're completely Indian. And they're certainly not serving the Pakistan military. The Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan is actually an expression of the anger of Pashtun people. And this is a very noble community. It's got a strong backbone. It's got a strong fighting spirit. And they are fighting back against oppression by the military in Pakistan of that very noble community. So it has nothing to do with that side of the Durand Line. But I can tell you, Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan will have relatives and friends across the Durand Line. And they will be told about what the Pakistan state is doing. And in my opinion, you're going to see an inevitable fusion of the Free Taliban with the Tehrik-e-Taliban Pakistan to ensure that the oppression of the Pakistan military and its ethnocentric policies will end.
Next question from Sandeep Sharma. Japan smells the Korea shout. China settlings equal opponent for Taiwan like its South Korea base will be matched by North. And so will India be also matched by Pakistan and Taliban?
Look, I do not believe that we will be matched for simple reason that the Indian armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Coast Guard, under good leadership, and I think Prime Minister Modi is a very good and very decisive Prime Minister. We have seen that now, what he did in Kashmir, and we have seen, what our troops did in the Galwan Valley. So no, I don't believe that is going to happen. And so far as so far as Pakistan is concerned, well, that's a different situation altogether. I think, frankly, India should support justice, human rights, equality of women in Pakistan, as well as in India, of course. And it should support, for example, looking after the proper treatment of minorities in Pakistan. You have to support the Baloch against the oppression by the Pakistan military. You have to support the Sindhis. You have to support the Pashtuns. You have to support the Shia. And we should be vocal about that. There's no point, in using very eloquent literary language in such a way that except for somebody who's a PhD in English literature, nobody understands what you're saying. You have to be direct about this kind of thing, very frankly. I think it's time to have a direct language, and I certainly hope when Prime Minister Modi meets Biden and his two other counterparts in the Quad, he's going to push for direct language.
Jerry G wants to know, is India giving airbase to US and bringing Russia and US together?
Look, let me tell you that I don't believe we are going to be in any hurry to give an airbase to the US. And I think, Jerry, you must understand, the US has a very poor track record of fighting insurgency. In Libya, they supported the wrong side. They supported fanatics whose specialization was cutting the throats of Christian, clergy, of cutting the throats of Yazidis, of cutting the throats of Shia. They gave them billions of dollars of assistance. And what happened finally? They were all fortunately driven out by Russia, by Iran, and by Bashar Assad. Iran and Russia drove out these bloodthirsty fanatics that were being backed by the US. So what happened in Libya? Collapse. What happened? Some was predicted in 2011, early 2011. You're going to have flood of refugees, Europe. You better be careful. But that didn't stop, Sarkozy and I think it was Cameron and
Merkel too.
Yeah, Merkel not so much, but all these three definitely from bashing up Gaddafi. And I warned them, watch out. You're going to have tremendous problem. Libya will collapse. It collapsed. What happened in Iraq? What happened in Iraq? Today, are you welcome in Iraq? Not at all. An Indian is welcome. An American is not welcome in Iraq, I can tell you. And if you're talking about trillions of dollars you've spent, 90% of that money has gone back to Americans, contractors, arms suppliers, and various other individuals who are working there and who are given very high salaries and very high perks for working in Afghanistan. And they have gone for American equipment. They have not gone to the Afghan people or to the Iraqi people or to the Libyan people or to the Syrian people. But the Americans have lost everywhere. So for heaven's sake, please, India has succeeded against the strong support of the United States in the beginning. And if I may say so, still some mild support to the major non-NATO ally Pakistan and the full-throated support of China to this rogue military, the Pakistan military. And we have held our own in the areas where the Pakistan military has sought to bring in terror. There are some states in India, some territories in India. We have held our own. So please, I don't think, very frankly, that, the US should be teaching us lessons in counterinsurgency. America should learn the lessons of its debacles in counterinsurgency. So yes, I support an alliance with America. I support joint activity with America, naval, air, and ground. But so far as ground thing is concerned, I think Indian army people should train the Afghans who are resisting. And I do believe India and the United States must join together in supporting the Northern Alliance. The future of the security in the United States and India, it's very critical the Northern Alliance be supported. I just want to add on this. The terror modules across the world that have been sleeping for these 2 decades since 9/11 have suddenly come back to life. You're seeing in New Zealand, you're seeing in other locations, people getting stabbed, people getting, bombed, shot, because terror modules feel, well, hey, our guys are one in Afghanistan. Maybe now we should now revive and we should become operational. There are terror modules across all our countries, and they have got really a huge boost in testosterone by what Biden has done in Afghanistan. It's a huge security threat to the United States, the manner of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. As I said, I support troop withdrawal, but what Biden did was cut off the legs of the Afghan military at the knee. Just cut it off by denying logistical support and by withdrawing all American firepower in Afghanistan, including, as you said, Bagram airbase. Bagram would have been ideally situated to serve the Northern Alliance. So I hope Joe Biden wakes up to reality sometime, because if he doesn't, I can tell you, another 9/11 will take place, not on the watch of the next president, as happened under Clinton, but it could very well happen under Biden's watch.
Next question, please. Balaji Subramanian wants to know, how should India deal with the current situation surrounded by the axis of evil, China, Pakistan, and Taliban? Your thoughts on the current government actions?
Well, look, one thing about the current government is not very open about its actions. So I'm very certain that the Prime Minister is doing a lot of important steps. Frankly, I'm not in a position to know what they are, except that I have confidence in Narendra Modi, and I'm very certain that he is taking whatever actions are needed to ensure India's security. And now this meeting of the Quad, for example, is a very important meeting, and I'm sure the Prime Minister will speak in a very forthright manner on Pakistan, and I'm sure he'll speak in a forthright manner on Afghanistan. You'll notice that India has been very, compared to the United States or Britain, for example, very reserved and cool towards the Taliban. Not cool enough and reserved enough for some of our liking, but very reserved and cool. So I am very confident that the Prime Minister Modi has got a strategy and that this strategy will be implemented. But sorry, I'm not in government. I don't know what the strategy is.
Shambho Banerjee wants to know, Pakistan economy is bankrupt and it has now conquered the Afghanistan territory. Being a nuclear power, they can't be moved out so easily. Isn't it embarrassing for the other side?
Shambho, way back in 2001, please see it, the Washington Times, they carried an article of mine called this absolute myth that there's likely to be a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan back in 2001. You remember Robert Blackwell, the ambassador, asked every American to clear out of India, lakhs of people, unnecessarily. There was never any question of a nuclear attack. Let me tell you, no nuclear power, and you can call this Nalapat's theorem, no nuclear power will, if the people who are running it are in their senses and the Taliban have not suddenly taken command, which I don't think is going to happen in any of these nuclear countries, no nuclear power will dare to attack another nuclear power with nuclear weapons. It's out of the question. Pakistan will not attack India with nuclear weapons. We are not going to attack Pakistan with nuclear weapons. So a lot of this is posturing and bluff. So let me assure you that the degree of pain that will be needed to cross that nuclear threshold of a nuclear power against another nuclear power will be life-threatening. So unless you have more or less taken over the bulk of Pakistan, they're unlikely to use nuclear weapons against you. And so far as China is concerned, quite very, very frankly, unless, we're not going to use nuclear weapons against them, they're not going to use nuclear weapons against us. That is the logic behind India being a nuclear power. And may I point out, successive US governments, especially from the time of Jimmy Carter onwards, tried to give China a nuclear monopoly in Asia. Then the Americans helped the Chinese to build up the Pakistan nuclear, whatever they call it, arsenal or whatever they call it, saying that, okay, what are we going to use? Let the Pakistanis have their bomb. I used to go to Washington during that time, and I've heard people in Washington tell me that this is their strategy. That, Pakistan will become a nuclear power, then we'll tell both you guys to give up your bombs because, frankly, you chaps can't handle nuclear weapons. You're not civilized enough or whatever, or not, smart enough or whatever. They were a little more, if I may say so, obnoxious in those days than they are today. And that know-it-all attitude has melted quite a bit. And after Afghanistan must have melted even more. But I'd only like to say that it is absolute fallacy that any nuclear power will launch a nuclear attack unless in a completely existential, life-threatening situation against any other nuclear power. And if it does so, it has got to be prepared for the end of itself, possibly the end of other country, and very likely, if major nuclear weapons are involved, the end of the entire planet.
Next question from Bhushan Ahuja. When Taliban implodes, which factions will separate?
I'm sorry, Bhushan, I can't predict that. I don't know, there are 6 factions. There are Free Taliban, and the younger people are very upset with the older people. And, frankly, you're seeing demonstrations in Kabul, women, etc. Believe me, this could not have happened without some elements of Taliban giving a wink and nod to these demonstrators. Of course, other factions of Taliban started beating them and shooting them. But the reality of the situation is that that particular trajectory, there is going to be a fight back of the Pashtuns against the control by China and Pakistan of elements of the Taliban. There will be a fight back on that. Pashtuns are a proud people. They will not accept servitude to China or to Pakistan or the United States or to Russia or to any other country.
Next question is from Mr. Lee. Is the USA collaborating with Al-Qaeda in Iraq?
No, definitely not. The USA is not collaborating with Al-Qaeda. USA may have mistakenly armed and trained Al-Qaeda and given them money, thinking that they were not Al-Qaeda. The problem with the US, frankly, is that something is wrong in their ground level intelligence collection. I don't know what it is. And basically, let's say that the real terrorists, they identify as the good guys. And the good guys, they very often mistake for terrorists because their source of information are pretty, frankly, very dubious and very dodgy. So they're definitely not supporting Al-Qaeda. The US, in fact, has played a very helpful role in fighting, Al-Qaeda and ISIS in terms of the money flow and the money supply. But the US could do much more in sanctioning Pakistan, for example, in sanctioning generals in some other countries who are supporting terrorism, in distancing itself from some of Erdogan's policies, much more than it is doing now. It has inadvertently helped some terrorist groups in the past, like India inadvertently helped some groups in the past, thinking that they are basically freedom fighters or whatever they're called. But definitely not knowingly. Definitely not.
Next question, please.
I think.
Okay, I think we are done with the questions. So thank you very much, Professor Nalapat. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. And we'll be back again shortly, maybe in a few weeks' time, to take stock of the situation in Afghanistan. Namaskar.
Thank you, Sri, and I enjoyed the questions. They're extremely cogent questions, and I always enjoyed being on your show. Take care.